So, to the Cratchits' Christmas, one of the longest, most detailed passages in the book. It's kind of it's a book that's done in almost episodic ways, and this is probably the longest of the episodes that we get. So, very, very important, very significant for us to see the central point that the Cratchits are poor, but they have a wonderful Christmas. He starts by introducing, again, the poverty of Bob Cratchit by looking at his house, and bringing up the fact that Mrs. Cratchit turns up straight away, dressed out in a twice-turned gown, trying to make things last the longest, and turning it more than possible, but braving ribbons because they're cheap. So, again, essentially making the best of what they have around them. The family enter kind of almost one by one. Before Martha comes in, it's well worth noting that Martha is the one who's been out working, the older girl, the oldest of the children here, and it points out, again, one of those little Dickens points, just put it there, that she's having to work overtime on Christmas just to clear up from things before. So, the way that workers, they'd say exploited, but certainly the way that workers are not necessarily treated the best. Then when Bob comes home, Martha plays a little game, a little joke with him, but gives up in terms of disappointing him because she doesn't want to disappoint him. She hides and pretends she's not coming, but she runs out because she can't see things go badly. So, we now come on to the introduction of Tiny Tim. We've been told that he has a crutch and walks with a frame. That's very, with an exclamation mark, so it's clearly something that he wants us to notice. And then we get this idea of how he feels about it. We are told that he said after leaving church that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to remind them on Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. It's that phrase we've used before here. Incredible generosity of spirit. Finding something positive in the fact that he is crippled and lame. Bob is incredibly emotional about this, which again shows the family bonds that we are seeing here. And those family bonds are increased, where at the bottom, as they're getting everything ready for Christmas, down here what we see is the family working together. They all have their own little jobs and they work together to produce it quite happily. Apart from Tiny Tim, who just sits, and apparently Bob as well, which is a bit strange, but never mind. So, we move into the actual dinner itself. Built up with the excitement of the goose having the knife plunged into it and seeing the stuffing come out. But what's interesting, I think, about the goose as much as anything else is how certain things are made clear. It's praised by everybody, universal admiration, including its cheapness. But when it's suggested it's been eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, and it's described as sufficient, what we see is that the understatement of this points out to us how small and meagre the meal actually is. But it's put through that positive understatement to show the understatement shows the kind of the Cratchit spirit. This leads on into the next stage of the meal, which is the bringing out the pudding, which I suppose is a huge issue for them, because I very much doubt they'd have pudding as a poor family any other time of the year, so it must be very, very important. Again, same technique. Like a speckled cannonball is hardly a particularly enticing way of describing a meal, but that's how they are. They're happy for what they've got. It's set alight as Christmas puddings are, but notice in half a quarter of ignited brandy. That's hardly anything. That's all they can afford to use, just so they manage to do it. Again, it's this idea of making the best of what they have. And I think the key thing, following on, is that first of all, Mrs. Cratchit confesses she has her doubts about the quantity of flour, which again, understated, suggests that there probably is quite a lot of flour in it. It's been eked out by flour in this case. However, what's important is, even though everybody has something to say about it, nobody said or thought even that it was a small pudding for a large family. It would have been heresy to do so. That's very, very important. They don't even think that there might be a problem here. That's how positive they are. Afterwards, they gather round and have some chestnuts and drink. We're told the family display of glass is 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. What Dickens there is doing is kind of like using a kind of a light comedy thing, the idea that is a display of glass to show how little they have, but the way that they're making the most of it. We then get Scrooge developing an interest he had never felt before in Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim seems to be a catalyst here for his interest in how children are being treated here. He seems to be very touched by him. He's told, though, that he will die, and he has his own words thrown back at him about the surplus population, and then is attacked by the ghost, who really never lets him, get away with anything, for what the word surplus actually suggests. He points out, who is surplus? Yeah? Will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It might well be you that's surplus, he says. Well, again, get the toast, something that's going to come in there. Another example of generosity of spirit, that despite the fact that there's so much of a problem with Scrooge and the way he pays them, it's still something that Bob feels he should do. Doesn't work with anybody else. They have a little bit of an argument about it, and it's mentioned that Scrooge is the ogre of the family. It can't get past that, and of course he has to notice that. To conclude, we're told at the end that, first of all, something that's going to become very important in this chapter, they start singing together. We're going to see that a lot. And they're described as not a handsome family, not well dressed, shoes far from waterproof, clothes scanty, probably knew the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy and grateful and pleased with one another. Essentially, this is the point of the entire section.